The Harvest Sprites are beloved characters that were staples of the Harvest Moon, now Story of Seasons games, that soon became fairly common to include in other farming sims. Within the games, they often appear alongside a harvest goddess, a kind of agricultural or nature deity who is inevitably stumbled upon by the protagonist. As the franchise was the progenitor of an entire genre, it makes sense that other developers in the space sought to include the supernatural elements that were so beloved in the original games. Superstitions exist in nearly every discipline, but with one as old as agriculture, it comes as no surprise that the folklore well is deep. With farmers being so closely tied to nature, it makes perfect sense that they would be some of the first people to notice spirits of place or supernatural events happening around them, and thus the trope of the harvest sprite was born. Today we'll be going over a few different folklore spirits from around the world that may have played a role in inspiring the sprites we love. In some of the Story of Seasons games, the harvest sprites were given the actual name Korobokkuru, which is the name of a real figure from Ainu folklore. The Ainu people are an indigenous group native to northern Japan, including the island of Hokkaido. In their folklore tradition, the Korobokkuru, sometimes called Korobokkuru in Japanese, are a race of small people. So small that their name can be interpreted to mean people below the leaves of the fuki, or butterbur plant, in the Ainu language. Within the Ainu belief system, the Korobokkuru are the people who have been living on the land the Ainu now inhabit long before they ever arrived there. They are small, able to move quickly and agilely, likely to not catch the human eye, and were particularly good anglers. When feeling particularly generous, they would sometimes leave gifts of fish or game in exchange for Ainu goods. But after a Korobokkuru woman was snatched by a young Ainu man, legend has it that they have not been seen since, their goodwill with the indigenous group all but evaporating. It is believed that a large chunk of the Korobokkuru tales were used to describe the abundance of archaeological remains that the Ainu found of other living beings scattered all across their lands. Fire pits, tools, and even pottery have long since been attributed to these small butterbur-dwelling people. I feel it important to mention here that the Ainu people's relationship with the people of Japan has, like many indigenous groups around the world, been fraught with prejudice, exploitation, and cultural genocide. It is hard to say whether the use of the Korobokkuru in creating the harvest sprites was done as an act of cultural appropriation or appreciation, but we can always hope for and encourage the latter. As we will further explore in this video, there are many similar spirits that exist in folklore traditions across the world, and perhaps the developers wanted to use a name that was closer to home, such that the Japanese audience could connect with it. Either way, maybe we'll be able to see even more Ainu influences and a further celebration of Ainu culture in a mainline Story of Seasons game in the future. Another similar spirit comes to us from Nordic folklore, though today Nisse are most often associated with the Christmas holiday or winter solstice celebrations. It is essentially a guardian of the home or barn, with an appearance not dissimilar to a garden gnome, with a conical hat and a long white or gray beard, with the small stature that easily explains why they are often able to move unseen. The Nisse gained much of its popularity in the 19th century when there was a resurgent interest in folklore. It is said that if they are treated well, they will protect the family and animals living on the land that they tend to, and may occasionally help with work around the farm. They are, however, able to be offended, and once insulted, tend to take on more of a trickster personality, though with a darker edge worthy of the brothers Grimm, as they have been reported to kill or maim livestock when angered. Nisse are quite set in their ways, and are rumored to dislike drastic changes taking place around the farm, and particularly do not like farmers who are lazy and not attentive to the needs of their livestock. If one wanted to leave a gift for a Nisse, they seem to prefer porridge, boiled in milk, with a generous amount of butter on top, and often this gift would be offered on Christmas Eve before the real dark days of winter had arrived. Though there are tales that those who do not offer the traditional gift at this time suffer misfortune after upsetting their small guardian. Hailing from Scottish folklore, brownies are a kind of household spirit that come out at night to help with chores in the home or around the farm. They are incredibly similar in lore to the Nisse, though their appearances differ some. Brownies are often described as having brown skin and usually wearing rags or simply running around naked. And while they are generally depicted as being quite small, just like the Nisse, in some much older stories they were described as being the same size as a human. Although perhaps not as violently malicious as their northern cousins, brownies are generally seen as mischievous tricksters, for all that they help around the farm. They are also easily offended, and while they might play pranks as retribution for being insulted, they might just as easily leave their homes, taking the prosperity they bestow upon the place with them. While many of the other spirits we'll discuss in this video are tied to their geographical location, brownies seem to be among the few that will simply leave if things aren't to their liking. Instead of porridge, brownies prefer a bowl of milk or cream, or even a small cake to be left out in offering, but rather than it being left in the barn, they like to have it by the hearth. Interestingly, there are stories of brownies leaving forever if they are presented with clothes, not unlike the house elves of Harry Potter fame. Ancient Rome had their own guardian deities in the form of Lares. They watched over either a physical place or ruled over a particular activity like seafaring. Unlike the more major deities, it seems that Lares were much more limited in what they could affect, and were often much more specific in their guardianship. Though they were far more Lares, as they would preside over very particular domains, whether physical, like a farm, or conceptual, like a profession. That said, they were an important part of the traditional household in Rome, and often Lares figures would be kept in a shrine alongside the representations of the household's domestic spirits, the genius, kind of like a guardian angel, and favored deities. Their statues would be brought to the table to preside over meal times and often witnessed important events like marriages or births. While many of the spirits we've discussed seem to be homebound, it's interesting that the Lares would be brought along for events of particular significance to the family. Like many of the other spirits we've discussed, if the needs of the Lares were not attended to, the family could most likely expect that fortune and prosperity would be absent from their lives until the error was corrected. Offerings were expected to be made to the Lares in the form of grain, garlands, honey, fruits, wine, and incense. Also, funnily enough, any food that fell on the floor during a banquet belonged to the Lares. In Slavic folklore, there are a particular kind of field spirits called Polevik, which seem to be unsettling creatures with heterochromia. Rather than hair, they grow grass from their head and tend to come out at noon or sunset. Most notably, they seem to be ardent protectors of their fields. Polevik legends describe them as actively going after those who dare wander into fields they aren't supposed to be in, leading them off to be lost or cursing them with diseases. Lazy farm workers also needed to be extra careful with the Polevik, as they were liable to be killed by the spirits outright for falling asleep on the job, especially if they did so after drinking heavily instead of working. The Polevik seem to be entirely geared around protecting the crops in the field and ensuring that they're able to see a good harvest by dissuading both interlopers from traipsing through their domain, potentially damaging crops, and workers who might wish to do a less than stellar job. With how important agriculture is for community survival, it makes sense that the Polevik would be largely appreciated by those wishing for a bountiful harvest to see them through winter. Now that we've met a few different spirits of homes and farms, do any of them seem particularly familiar? Perhaps the harvest sprites that many of us are so familiar with are far less violent or vengeful than some of the ones we met today. Nearly all of them seem to have a penchant for being largely unseen, but like to be given gifts for their acts of service, which sounds very familiar to the little brightly colored elves I've been spending so many hours trying to befriend in various games. I've always adored the Harvest Sprites, and I had a lot of fun digging into various different folklore traditions to try and unearth where some of their inspiration might have come from. I think we can leave the livestock killing to stories, though. Let me know if there are any similar spirits and stories in your own culture. I have to imagine that humans the world over have conceptualized small agricultural helpers to explain the unexplained around the farm for centuries. I'd love to hear new tales. And with that, cottagers, I hope you all have an excellent rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.